D, and you can identify what room they're in. So, scan
Only if
three,
you had,
IETF.
only if you had the same button for IETF. It's not the projector. Get rid of the staring.
They're going around? Find one and sign and click. I mean, she should be coming in. I think you got to protect this.
Three. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're already late, so we're going to start. We are here for the routing area open meeting, which means we're all going to listen to whoever's sitting up here. Fred? Les? Okay, thank you. So we're going to start. As you can see, there's 3 of us here today. Adrian went out to get some coffee, I guess. I hope he'll be back in a few minutes so we can go on with the meeting. So, as always, please note well, everything you say will be used as IETF contribution. Also, note all the resources that we have, the directorate, the wiki, the Java room, everything else that is in this sheet. The blue sheet's already going around. This is the agenda for today. We're going to do the normal administration stuff, give an update on the area, working group chair training, obviously talk about Yang. Then we're going to have a presentation of the winner of the ANRP, that's the Applied Networking Research Prize that the IRTF gives out. Then we will have the updates on the working group and the BOFs. This time we didn't have any BOFs. And then hopefully towards the end we'll have some time to talk about anything else you want to talk about. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda, additions, deletions? Nope. Okay. So,
Sure, I can. So we've had a number of different working group changes. First, Forces, after a very long and extremely productive time as a working group, has closed. There's a couple drafts that are still going to be progressing. I'm going to AD sponsor them. I can't thank Jamal and DJ enough. Jamal in particular, has stuck with this working group, and it's got some really cool technology in it. And so they were going to have a little bit of a celebration in a working group here, but that didn't happen. So I'd just like to really thank them. And if you've been doing Forces, do celebrate it. The goal of working group chairs is to finish the work and close the working group, and we see it far too seldom in routing. So good job. Second, we're back on the rechartering spree. We've been rechartering MPLS, CCAMP, PCE, and we did a minor one for I2RS. And we've also chartered TEAS, which is part of the area retuning. They met for the first time this morning. And we also chartered Beer, or Bayer if you're not German. But Beer met for the first time earlier this week. If you're not familiar with it, we had a BOF last time, and it's if I do say so, pretty cool, neat ideas about multicast routing and changing the data plane in that regard. So go take a look. I do expect that we're going to continue doing some of the rechartering on working groups moving forward, sort of to tune them up. PIM and ISIS, I think, are 2 of the next candidates. We are also very pleased to welcome to the routing area 3 new working groups. They're coming to us from the INT area, where they have been lodged sort of up against routing for quite some time, but we feel they belong more properly here in our fold, and also to offload the INT-ADs a little bit. So we're going to have L2TPEXT and Lisp and Trill, and those are all joining us here. You'll start hearing status reports. So if you haven't been paying attention to them and you're looking for a routing area related working group to go to, they're there, and they've been going along really well. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. As you can tell by the fact that there are 3 of us sitting up here, first of all, I don't think Adrian's back yet, darn it. Anyway, many, many, many thanks to Adrian for his 6 years of service. And having done this for a year, it's service to the routing area and to the IETF. We really appreciate it. But now he gets to relax a little bit. And we have 3 of us. We have Alvaro, of course, and Deborah and myself. We've balanced the workload, and Alvaro will show that on the next screen to show you which working groups each of us is going to be responsible for. We're all balloting during IESG review. You can think of this as ensuring that routing area drafts will get good review during the IESG review, since now there are 3 of us to help make sure that you've all done a really good job. So, working group distribution. I don't think you can read this very easily, but it's also up on Data Tracker working groups. The Secretariat has conveniently converted things over. And yeah, you can go check there. It's up here on the slides. I don't think we need to go through. Right, working group chair training. So as you know, or perhaps you may remember, back in June, I started with this idea that I started a program of doing working group chair training for the routing area. We, of course, have the edu team that does general working group chair training, but this is specific towards the routing area working group chairs, both to sort of get some consistency across the area, get people thinking about and talking about different aspects, and of course, build the sort of camaraderie that makes it really easy for us to collaborate and work together to manage the area. You can take a look at the wiki and see what the previous sessions are. We've had about 4 of them. If you're only pick one, and I hope you all pick one, because those of you who aren't working group chairs and have already seen it may one day be working group chairs, and regardless, you're all participants. Watch the one on consensus. Pete Resnick did a great job. It's very easy to forget in the day-to-day why we do consensus-based standards development and why we make the kinds of decisions we do. Please read it. Please listen to it. It's really critical for understanding how we're doing standardization here. Let's see. We have upcoming sessions. One is key knowledge on Yang and NetConf, because we are seeing a large infusion of Yang models, and needless to say, having that expertise will be useful for our chairs having more knowledge. We're going to talk about charters and milestones. What are they for? And document shepherds, doing it well. And I'll remind you all that it's very useful to go and volunteer to your working group chairs that you'd like to be a document shepherd, because working group chairs don't have to be document shepherds. You can step up, help out, and be a draft shepherd for just one draft, get a little bit of seeing how the sausage is made and taking it through, and share the burden. It's really helpful. Let's see. We also have periodic routing area working group chair chats. That's where we make the bad jokes and just talk about general topics of interest. And all of this is also to remind you, the IETF keeps working between physical meetings on the mailing lists and otherwise, and so should you. Thanks. Okay. David, did you want to talk to this? Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, while he's coming up to the stage, Adrian, thank you so much.
So for you that don't know me, my name is Dave Sinecrope. I'm one of the 2 routing area Yang coordinators, which is a mouthful. I should come up with a better name. There's been... Closer to the mic? Okay. Chin, are you in the room? No. Okay, I have a counterpart. His name is Chim Wu. He's also one of the other coordinators. What we've been doing is, because of the explosion in Yang modeling, in particular in the routing area, we've set up a collaboration and coordination site within the routing area wiki to help kind of get a handle on all the different models that are being started and being pursued, and where they stand, who needs to review them, what state they're in, et cetera, et cetera. All of this information we've compiled initial versions on within that routing area Yang coordination wiki, and in particular there's a routing area Yang coordination table that has all of the drafts and all the information that I just mentioned. We did the initial version. What I would like is for folks, in particular the working group chairs, to get the folks that are writing the Yang models to help maintain this information, okay? Like right now, I think it's broken down into working group draft, and it's broken down into individual draft, and I think there's over 70 Yang model lines in those tables. Some of those models have been condensed down into a single model. Some of them have expired. What we need is for the folks that are working on the Yang models to go take a look at that wiki, take a look at those tables, and update the information. In addition, we'd like to get the working group chairs to look at who needs to review each model, all right, and kind of do an assessment and list down the working groups where those reviews need to happen. Because at this point, I think a lot of those fields are set to null, and that just means that the model isn't being reviewed, and I'm sure that it does. In addition to the coordination tables, there's another area on that wiki for folks that are thinking about or considering creating a model to actually post some of their initial thoughts and solicit contributors and solicit other people that are interested in writing said model, to kind of is kind of an incubator, so to speak, for creating Yang models in the routing area. So I'd encourage people to use that part of the wiki as well. We just added today a set of links to the ops area wiki that point off to where the Yang compiler stuff is. Okay, so Benoit and I think it was Jan Medved came up with a Yang compiler that will check syntax, etc. And as part of the review process for the Yang models, we're asking people to actually run it through the compiler so that we can automatically pick up bugs and it doesn't take a manual review to do that. Are they? Okay, I didn't go drill down into that, but there's links on the coordination wiki to point off to what needs to be used.
Yeah, the tool that goes through and finds the Yang model, the Yang drafts related to Yang, and runs through them all. I'm not sure if it sends automated mail yet to encourage the authors to improve their drafts.
No. That's the latest information that we have on the Yang coordination wiki and the activity that we're doing. Does anybody have any questions?
For those of you who haven't looked, this is a large job Dave and Jen have taken on. There are over 80 different individual drafts with Yang models in them, and I think we're not at the top of the curve. We really need you to take responsibility for updating the wiki. If you want people to know about your draft, if your efforts to put a first stake in the ground there and get people talking and thinking about that draft really matters, put it in the wiki.
Okay, thank you.
I'd also like to talk just very briefly about how to handle cross-working group Yang models, because we have a number of them coming up, and they sort of fall into two categories. We had a routing working group chairs lunch on Tuesday and chat about this and came up with a few policy ideas that we're going to run with until we have a reason to change them. So the first piece is some models cover multiple working groups. That is fine, just fine, if that's the right management, network management and operational model. We don't need to force Yang models to conform to the IETF management structure. But we will give primary ownership and responsibility for the model to one working group and make sure that the cross-working group review happens. So that's how we're going to handle it, and we'll figure out which working group it is, because our chairs, you guessed it, they work well together. They talk to each other. We'll figure it out. Second, some models will need to be used by multiple models which are in different working groups. So one of the working groups with primary use case that's using that model will have the ownership and drive it forward. And again, make sure that there is cross-working group review. There's a couple motivations for this. One is we really can't overfill RTGWG with Yang models. First of all, RTGWG is doing other things and needs to continue to do other things. And second of all, there's a reason we don't have a routing area Yang model working group. And we don't want to have one, because then we won't have the routing expertise in it. We will have the Yang expertise in it, and why did we bother? Because there's netmod, there's other things that could happen in an ops. So we don't want to overfill RTGWG. And really, our working group chairs are excellent, and they will collaborate and discuss and figure out which working group will own a model. If you're not sure, you can send email to RTG chairs, you can send email to RTG Yang Coord. This is all management fiddling, and we'll get it right.
Thanks. So the next thing on the agenda is an update on the L3SM working group. I'm going to skip that. Benoit wanted to be here. He's in the ops area meeting right now. So he'll be here a little bit later. So we're going to jump into the ANRP presentation. And I'm going to change this. Aaron here from the University of Wisconsin is going to talk about this. I can't talk and do my PowerPoint.
Excellent. Thanks. Hopefully you weren't at the IETF open meeting and haven't already seen the longer version of this talk. If you have, please bear with me and you can come up with a creative question to ask at the end. So the work I'm going to be talking about today is some research that we've done to really extend the ideas that exist in the software-defined networking space into network functions and middle boxes as a way to help operators that are running these network functions be able to better satisfy a number of different goals. So for those of you who maybe don't work in the network function space, what I'm talking about here is devices in the network that are going to perform sophisticated and stateful actions on packets or flows as they pass through the network. WAN optimizers, caching proxies, intrusion detection systems, as you start to talk about cellular networks, perhaps even things like the evolved packet core, all fall under this NF network function space. And when operators are deploying these in their network, they want to make sure that they're going to satisfy some sort of SLAs, perhaps on performance or packet loss in some way. We want to make sure that we're not spending a lot of money to run these functions within our network in order to get the benefits that they're providing. And at the same time, we want to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to. So if we've put in intrusion detection system, we want to make sure it's actually detecting malicious traffic in our network. So there's two trends today that are helping to reshape the way that these are being deployed. One of these, which you've probably heard of before, is network functions virtualization, or NFV. The basic idea in NFV is that we're going to take what was dedicated hardware appliances and replace them with pure software appliances, so virtual machines running on top of generic compute resources. And this means that as we need more capacity or as we want to introduce new functions into the network, it's just a matter of launching new virtual machines with those functions. So it makes it really easy to dynamically add more network function instances. The other big trend is software-defined networking. And what this gives us is flexibility in how we're routing traffic through our network, which makes it really easy for us to move what traffic is being handled by a specific network function instance at any given point in time. And so together, if we take these two trends, this should allow us to be very dynamic about how we're allocating what device, what network function in our network is processing which network traffic. And this allows us to realize new sorts of abstractions like an elastic network function that scales in and out as the load in our network changes. The thing is that NFV and SDN alone don't give us everything that we actually need to realize those three goals that I talked about earlier. So let's take a scenario here where we have an intrusion detection system, and we're going to have some flows that are passing through this. I'll assume they're TCP flows, but it could be traffic going between a certain set of hosts. And so our intrusion detection system is going to establish some state for these flows, things about what are the endpoints of this connection, what partial signature matches have we seen in these packets thus far, information such as that. And so at some point, if the rate of these flows increases, now we're going to increase the load on this instance, and we're going to start to hit our SLA, a performance bottleneck. And so we can easily use NFV to launch another instance, and if we have an SDN switch, we can easily reroute some traffic. But the question is, well, what traffic should we go about rerouting? So one option is that we could take any new flows that come into our network from this point forward and punt those to our second instance. So we can have some green flow. We're going to establish some state for that green flow at our second instance. And the problem here is that we haven't taken any load off of this already loaded instance. So we're not going to be able to satisfy our SLA. The other thing here is that there may be information that pertains to both the green and the blue and red flows that we need to be aggregating in some way. So maybe we're trying to do a port scan detection of some sort. And so it's not clear that splitting traffic in this way will get us the accurate IDS analysis that we're looking for. So another option is that we can say, let's take some of our existing traffic and move it over. So we could take our blue flow, reroute it to our second instance that we added, which now means we can satisfy our SLA. The load on each instance is low enough. The problem here is that there's still state for this blue flow that remains at the original instance and is not available at this second instance. So now the IDS doesn't have the information it needs in order to see, is there malicious traffic within this flow? And so we're not going to be able to satisfy our accuracy goal. Now, at some point, this flow may die off, the load in our network is going to go down, and that means, from a cost perspective, we want to be able to terminate this second instance that we launched. We no longer need that capacity in our network. The problem is if we just destroy it right away, we'd run into the same problem that we had before with the blue flow. So now we're going to wait for this green flow to die, such that we know we're done with its state, which is going to be great, except that means we now need to wait a potentially unbounded amount of time before we can get rid of this other instance in order to maintain accuracy and satisfy SLAs. So now we've suffered on our cost objective. So clearly we need something more in order to be able to satisfy these three goals at the same time. And so one thing that we need is somehow the ability to transfer this internal state that these network functions are maintaining between different instances of a given function that may be running in our network. And we want to be able to do this quickly, such that if we're trying to do something like elastic scaling, we can make sure that we can scale in and out very quickly. The other thing is that while we're actually moving this state around, we want to make sure that we're not violating the accuracy of what our network function is doing. And so that means we need certain guarantees on how this move operation is taking place. So we may say we don't want to lose any packets or any update to state, and we want to make sure that potentially packets are processed in a particular order. Now, these same requirements apply not only to this elastic scaling scenario, but if we wanted to make network functions that are highly available, if we want to be able to do some sort of in-place upgrades, and a variety of other interesting scenarios, all have these same requirements. So I hope I've convinced you that we need something more than NFV and SDN. I'm going to talk about the challenges in realizing that something more, and then I'll delve into a few of the details of the architecture that we've come up with as a first pass at trying to address these requirements. And also I'll close with a simple evaluation result to show this does actually work and allows us to satisfy those three goals I started off with. So the first challenge that we face is the fact that there's a lot of different network functions out there. There's the caching proxies, load balancers, WAN optimizers, and we're continually introducing new network functions into our network every day. So how do we deal with this diversity and make it easy to accommodate new network functions as they arise? The second thing is that there's a lot of going on in our network at once. We have state that's being established and updated in our network functions. We have packets flowing through our network, and we want to be doing this forwarding update to change how traffic is being rerouted. And so we want to make sure that we don't end up with some race condition that violates the safety of how this transfer of state or these processing of packets are happening. Lastly, we want to make sure that this is efficient. We want it to not consume a lot of memory or CPU overhead or take a long amount of time, especially if we're talking about doing it for high availability or for something like scaling. We're already talking about fairly resource-constrained scenarios there, so we don't want to add more overhead. I'm not going to talk about this third challenge due to the limited time. I'll just touch on the first two today. So in order to address these challenges, we've come up with an architecture that looks very similar to what you'll see in SDN today. And that's we have this logically centralized controller. And this controller, on top of it, is going to have a scenario-specific control application. So you might write a control application that realizes this elastic scaling that I talked about a little bit earlier. And it's going to issue operations to the controller to move state between different network functions as it determines that it wants to reroute traffic in the network. At the same time, beneath this controller, we have the network functions themselves, and these have some API that they expose, so we can get state out of them and put state into them. And so when a control application issues one of these higher level operations, we're going to have a module that'll translate it into individual calls to individual network functions. And then once our transfer or copy of state is complete, then we can interface with a forwarding module that may already exist in the network to actually update the forwarding state in our switch. Could use OpenFlow, could use some completely other protocol that's not even necessarily SDN. Some way to update forwarding is all that we care about here. So how do we deal with exporting and importing state from network functions, given that there's such diversity out there? Well, while the state that each network function maintains is different, because it's trying to do some sort of different analysis of traffic, it turns out that the way most network functions allocate and think about updating the state is actually very structured. And that's, they deal with state generally in terms of either a single flow or some collection of flows, where that collection of flows could be related by a host, it could be related by a URL, or any other sort of network unit that we might think about. And so as an example here, let's look at the internals of the Bro intrusion detection system. So here, for every single connection that we're currently analyzing, we have some connection objects as well as some protocol-specific analyzer state. And we're going to organize this state internally in some sort of a hash table, such that when a packet for a connection comes in, we know what state we should be updating in response to processing that packet. This IDS also maintains state that pertains to a particular host. So any flows going to the same host will all update the same state. Maybe we have a count of how many connections have gone to that host. And lastly, we'll have state that's updated potentially for every packet that we receive. This is something like simple statistics that we might be maintaining at the IDS. So we can leverage this structure to build a relatively simple API for network functions to export and import their state. And so we provide three basic functions, get, put, and delete. And each of these functions, we specify the scope of state that we want, as well as a filter that defines the set of flows whose state we're interested in. Our network function itself, we're going to modify to take this filter and this scope, look at its internal state, and return any state objects that match this criteria that we've specified. Likewise, we can provide some state to that network function and should integrate it within its internal state structures. Now the thing is that with this design, the network functions themselves don't have to change how they're organizing state internally or give us the details of how that state is structured. They can even encrypt the state when they export it if they want to completely protect how things are working internally. We just need to know that this is a binary chunk of information that we needed in another network function to process traffic there. So given these lower level operations, now we can talk about how we actually provide things like moving of state to these control applications. So a control application might say that it wants to move all HTTP traffic from being processed by our first IDS instance to a second IDS instance. And so it'll issue this move operation, and our controller, the first thing it's going to do is to get the state that pertains to these HTTP flows from the first instance. And that state's going to come back to the controller. We can then flush this state from the first instance because it's no longer needed there. We're only going to need it at the new location where these flows are going to be processed. We'll put this state on our second instance, and then we can go ahead and update forwarding such that traffic now goes to this new location where our state's located. We can do similar things to be able to copy state or share state with some consistency guarantees between network functions. I'm happy to answer questions about this later if you want to know more about these mechanisms. So there's a problem that we run into, though, here as we talk about transferring the state, and that's the fact that we can lose things while the state transfer is happening. So let's take the same scenario where I'm going to assume that these intrusion detection systems are running some analysis that's computing a hash of the payloads of all the packets in a connection and comparing that hash against a database of known malware. So there's a fairly standard script that comes with the Bro intrusion detection system. So we'll have a blue flow that comes in and a red flow that comes in. We're going to assume the red flow is malicious, but we don't know that yet. Our IDS should ideally detect that. And so we're going to track what is the hash that we've computed so far, over what packets have we computed that hash. So at some point we decide we want to move this red flow, maybe because our first instance has too much load on it. So we'll go ahead and transfer its state, but before we make our forwarding update, it's possible another packet comes in. So now this IDS has gotten this other packet, but it doesn't have any state for this red flow. And so what it's going to end up doing is treating this as a new flow, creating a new set of state. Now at some point, our forwarding update will take effect, and a third packet of this flow will come in, and now it'll go to the second instance. But now at the second instance, I only have the state for my first and my third packets, which means the hash that I compute is going to be wrong, and I'm never going to raise an alert to detect the malware within this connection. So what we want in this case is we want some guarantee that this move operation is loss-free. In other words, we want to make sure that no packets are lost and that no updates to state are lost. So in order to do this, we need the network functions to do a little bit more for us, and that's tell us if they're going to go about updating state. And the only time they're going to do this is when they get a packet. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, tell the network function that it should take any packets it receives, apply a filter that we've provided against them, similar to the filter that we're using to fetch state from these network functions. And then any packets that match should be sent in an event to our controller. The network function itself will then go ahead and process this packet, buffer it for processing later, or simply discard it and not do any further processing on it, depending on what we've specified. And so to add this simple event-based mechanism, again, we need a very minimal change to the network function. We just need to add some hooks into the main process, or the main loop that's receiving packets off of the network and analyzing those packets. Okay, so how do we actually use this now to get that loss-free property? Well, so we can start off with getting a packet for this red flow, like we did before. But before we start any state transfer, we're going to enable events, which is going to say, whenever you get a packet for the red flow, tell the controller about it, and don't process this packet any further at this instance. So now we can go ahead and start our transfer of state. But if a packet comes in while the state transfer is happening, our event mechanism will recognize that this packet needs to go to the controller, where the controller can temporarily buffer it until our state transfer is finished, at which point we can now release that packet, and now it can get processed by the second instance. So now if our forwarding update kicks in, when our third packet comes to this instance, we now have the state for all three packets, which means we can compute the correct hash and detect there's malware in this flow and raise our alert. So we have a similar mechanism to provide an order preserving guarantee, which I'm not going to go into the details of here. But we've implemented this architecture currently as a module that's running atop the Floodlight SDN controller. We've also written a communication library that existing network functions can use to interface between what they're doing internally to capture state and to be able to communicate that to our controller. And we've modified 4 different network functions at this point. The Bro intrusion detection system, IP tables, Squid caching proxy, as well as PRADS, which is a asset monitoring system that's used in our university network. So what are the benefits? Can we actually achieve the goals that we set out to achieve by using this architecture? So let's take a scenario here where we're running an intrusion detection system, like I've been talking about. In particular, we'll run Bro. And we're replaying a trace of traffic from our university network at a rate of approximately 10,000 packets per second. 180 seconds into this experiment, we'll decide that we want to move the processing of all HTTP flows to a new IDS instance. So there's 489 flows at the time we do this, so we'll move the state and the processing of those flows. And then 180 seconds later, we'll move the processing for all the HTTP flows back to our original instance. So in order to do this transfer of state, it takes 260 milliseconds, and we do this in a loss-free way because our intrusion detection system is getting a copy of traffic, which means if the copy is dropped, there's no opportunity for it to be retransmitted because the client, presumably the server or client, presumably received the original packet. So even though the copy was dropped, the original got there. And so it needs to be loss-free, but this is reasonably quick. In terms of accuracy, we looked at the log entries that were produced if we do this move operation versus what happens if we never did this move, and analyzed all traffic using a single instance for the entire experiment. And the logs were exactly the same. If we'd used a simple solution that you might think about, which could be to replicate VMs, right? These are running as virtual network functions. Why not just replicate the VM? That works great when you want to scale out, but as soon as you want to scale in, we have no way to combine 2 VM images into one. And so now when we do this scale in, we start to see things missing from our log, because now we're not able to combine the state from these 2 instances. Lastly, from a cost perspective, when we want to scale in, we can do so almost immediately. Again, it takes us about 260 milliseconds to move the state back at this point where we're going to scale back in, which means we don't need to wait for the longest flows in our trace to die. If we had waited for those flows to die, those flows were over 25 minutes long in the longest case, that we would have held up this second instance unnecessarily. So in conclusion, I hope I've convinced you that in order to realize SLAs, low cost, and accurate network function operation, we need something more than what NFV and SDN can provide us today. In particular, we need a way to efficiently and safely transfer state between network function instances, and OpenNF is one such architecture to do this. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to visit our website for OpenNF. There's a paper out there, a more detailed version of the slides, and you can also download the code and try it out if you want to. I will also say, you should note well that some of the things I talked about today do have IPR protections over them, but the code download talks about what those are. So with that, thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Linda Dunbar from Huawei. I found this presentation is really interesting, and the work you're doing and is very interesting. But it's very broad, right? When you have network functions, as one slide said, it's all different. There's no standard. It's not like routing. We don't know it's forwarding. And here in IETF, are you planning to create a new work item here, or what is your goal presenting this? Just for information only?
Yeah, primarily for information. I don't know at this point that we're going to go about drafting anything in particular. It's sort of an issue that we've been working on from a research perspective, and thinks it's an important thing for the community to be thinking about.
Okay.
Can I just interject a sec? So you may not be aware, the IRTF has the Applied Networking Research Prize to encourage people who are doing promising research that may have some applicability and allow them to be able to come to the IETF so they can meet all of you charming people and have some great conversations. I'd also say that the IRTF has both an SDN-RG and there are some efforts to start up an NFV-RG, so you might find this out.
Just for your information,
Sure.
we have a similar effort, but a much smaller scope. There's what we call interface to network security functions.
Okay.
It's primarily focusing on flow-based security functions. It's a very small portion of that. And we have a bits and bytes demo, and welcome you to come over there. Maybe you can look at what they have done, what you have done.
Okay, well, I will definitely come to the demo.
Thank you.
AC Lyndon. Have you looked at using just the part of it, the state part of it, for high availability? I'm just wondering if you have any applicability.
So we have. We've thought about that problem. We have not specifically built it. There's some other work that's very similar to ours that came out of IBM research. It's a system called Pico replication, and they specifically do something very similar for high availability. This certainly can apply to that case. You need to do a little bit more because you run into the situation of if you want to exactly get that high availability, you can't let your packets that you've processed get out into your network until you know that you've snapshotted its state. So actually doing some sort of follow-up work to this, which is to say, how do we figure out exactly what state we need? To date, we've manually modified these network functions, but there's techniques in the program analysis community that we can leverage to automate that process and help make it easier to potentially build a highly available network function from one that's not highly available today.
Any more questions? Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks.
Okay, now we're going back to the regular program. Let's see. Benoit's not here yet. Nope, so we're going to go. Sure. So, Adrian, you're up. We're going to go back. Yes.
Oh, really?
Really?
Hold it over there for me. I'll tell you which one. Hello, my name is Benoit. Benoit wanted to briefly introduce a new working group in the ops area that got sort of formed by stealth. That is, there was no BOF. There was a discussion in the IESG that this would be a cool thing to spin up quickly, do some work, go away again, which is the way working groups used to be before all those long-lived routing area working groups. The IESG talked about it, wrote a charter, put the charter out for community review, and formed the working group, just not quite in time to have a meeting at this IETF. You see, you give me one of these things, and I just randomly push buttons until that'll do. That's the wrong way. That way, right. So it got approved by the ISG during the week, and chartered, and off it goes. I'm one of the chairs. Ching Wu from Huawei is the other chair, and is obviously Yang experienced, being one of our young coordinators in the area. The work comes out of a design team that Benoit and I put together with a number of operators only, because we wanted an operator view of this, not a vendor view of it. And they, as a design team, produced draft L3 VPN service Yang, because they had no idea how to name the draft, because we hadn't created a working group for it. So that will get renamed at some point, I guess, with an appropriate tag in it so it gets found. The reason we used operators, I'll come back to that. The reason we used operators was because we are looking at the interface between the operator and the operator's customer. And that is something that really the vendor doesn't see and shouldn't really be influencing. And we wanted to see whether we could get a group of operators to agree on the description of a service model, and Layer 3 VPN seemed like a good starting point. I confess I was completely skeptical that this would happen. When I look at how operators describe their services to their customers, each operator describes it very, very differently. So we put them together to see whether they would agree, and within very short order they came up with the draft. So I was wrong, but that's good. So the charter, short-lived working group. If I'm around as chair of this working group this time next year, I have failed. BFD. Remember BFD? We're working then on a service model description for Layer 3 VPN that is for the interface between customers of operators and those operators. This is not a Layer 3 VPN configuration model. Do not expect that you can take this Yang model and talk to a network element with it. It's really for talking to something which those of you with SDN heads could call an orchestrator or a service orchestrator. I prefer to see it almost like an automated purchasing system between the customer and the operator. And then that would map to how you configure the protocols, the network elements, etc., through this magic unicorn box thing. Obviously, however, somebody who is doing the thought of the how do I map, how do I use this request for a service and map it to the control of the network, has to look at how do I map this field to whatever I've got, a BGP MPLS VPN. And in the process of doing that, may identify some interesting holes in the Yang models that are being produced for the protocols and the network elements. And maybe there will be a little piece of work later, which is actually to try to document those mappings. Here is Benoit. He has come in the room. But by the time he gets to the front, I will have finished the last slide, so ha-ha. This working group should consider the existing draft that's out there as a starting point. That doesn't mean it must adopt it, but it's a good starting point for the discussion. And since we only want one deliverable, don't all go out firing off new drafts to compete with this, please. Please bring your ideas and discussions based on this draft, and then we can work out whether to adopt it, throw it away, or seriously bend it. The deliverable is January 2016, which means that Ching and I will be putting some intermediary milestones in place to drive the authors and then the working group to get this done. I think that's that's my last slide. Any questions? No, Eric? No? Okay.
I don't have a question. I have a stone I want to throw at you. That's not a question. Eric Osborne, level 3. I made these comments in ops as well. I just wanted to reiterate them here. In true IETF fashion, this came up in net conf or mod or whatever it was the other day, and I both did not understand it and was vehemently against it. I'm less against it now that I've seen the yellow highlighted bits. It makes sense. It's a proof of concept. I was nervous about us getting into the ITU style service delivery business, and I see that's not the intent. But if you could go back one slide, please. Why not experimental track? What's standard about a science experiment?
I'm just the chair. I just deliver on what the charter says. Benoit?
It seems that you lost courage in a couple of days, since you're not any longer. Okay, that's a fair comment, Eric. I understand what you're telling me, that you're somehow afraid that this will appear in RFPs, and okay, fine. The way I see this is more, and it's more like getting the homework done in the IETF to make sure that we get all the different Yang models. The one from the topology, the one from all the protocols, right, as you have mentioned, I guess, before I arrived. So I'm fine with that if this is the consensus of the people here.
So proposal would be, I mean, let's not treat this like the L3SM working group, but the proposal would be, let's just work on the draft, and if, as we get nearer to January, we discover that people are really excited in building, then we'll standards track. If it looks like it's an experimental. If it looks like just a kind of description of maybe the service, then maybe it's informational. So we come back to Benoit and ask to recharter accordingly at the time.
That's perfect. This is the one I like.
Any more? All right. In particular, service providers, please review the draft that's out there and start commenting. All of you, if you know enterprise customers, in other words, people who buy services from service providers, so the other side of this particular fence, I'd like to have them involved as well. Thanks.
Okay, now to the exciting part. Sorry. So I hope we have at least one chair from every group. We're going to go in order. Martin.
So Martin Forbes, speaking together with Thomas, who's behind. First of all, thank you very much, Adrian, for all you did for the group and for us. And welcome Alvaro, with whom we had a very nice lunch. Group is in good shape, honestly. We were really satisfied with the latest meeting we met, when was it? 2 days ago, yesterday. The attendance is pretty much stable, over 100 people, and with good discussions on the mic, at the mic, with a varied set of people. Not always the same suspects, I mean. Activity on the list also, there is activity on the list, which is a good sign, but it's more in peak mode. We have a burst of exchange and then pretty much nothing, but nevertheless constructive discussions there as well. And from a document perspective, we've had 2 new RFCs since last meeting. We've run a batch of adoption calls that led us to have 25 or so working group documents, and pretty much the same for individual IDs, so we have work on our plate. It's not surprising, the biggest items, often the items that we are working on, of course, concern EVPN, multicast VPN. We have some activities also starting around cleaning up INR registries and so on. And as chairs, we have a bit of coordination to do amongst some proposals that are popping up, typically in the context of EVPN and designated forwarder election. Thomas, you want to add something? No. That's it.
BFT?
Jeff Haas, now serving year 11 of my one-year working group. So the wiki is being kept up to date, requires a small amount of refresh to have the stuff in the meeting. We managed to have 2 BFD-related RFCs come out. One was actually from the CARP working group and documented things that we are using as inputs to our security. We also have the BFD intervals RFC put out, which describes common intervals that should be done across multiple implementations for maximum interoperability. If the authentication is still stalled out, we are not expecting that to move anytime soonish, although one of the works that was presented at this IETF was a mechanism that may allow for stronger authentication to be used. Although a common problem is that BFD authentication, even in its current form, is not really deployed very well. BFD multipoint, which is being used by multicast applications and most recently is being used in the Trill context, has been split into 2 documents, and the core document is heading for hopefully quick RFC since it documents what is currently deployed. The active tail was previously something that was not being used, and that will be being used by Trill. So we can't get rid of it, can't make it experimental. We'll have to progress that as a Bro standard. Next slide, please. Seamless BFD is progressing, just progressing a little bit slowly. The use case document finished last call, and we need a couple of last edits before we send it off to ISG. The alert discriminator document was refreshed, talked about in some length at the BFD meeting, and the authors are withdrawing the proposal for the time being. There's just not enough consensus around actually using it, but we'll keep it in our back pocket in case we need it. The basic IT versions of the document have not been refreshed recently. There's a clarifications document, RFC 5884, which is getting ready for working group last call. We'd appreciate any feedback you may have upon that. The BFD Yang team has actually published their first ID. We're asking everybody to review it. Now, in particular, for the design pattern that includes of having BFD configuration as something that may be imported by other routing protocol modules. This means that if you are OSPF or ISIS or BGP, and you want to actually include BFD configuration and allow for common reuse of not only configuration keywords, but potentially parameters, you can do that just simply by using a couple of small statements and examples included in the draft. And this is a pattern we'd encourage the IETF as a whole to start adopting. And other interesting BFD documents, there are actually 2 relating to making use of BFD for BGP next hops that have come up in an IDR context. Those are not actually being presented, had not been presented this last IETF. We actually now have a 3rd document that is covering roughly the same space, and at least one of these is specific to the route server context.
All right, I'm Tony P. I don't think Greg is here, so I give a quick status. I didn't send out something. Yes, so we have been chartered, initial meeting. We had a pretty vibrant list discussion going. We had a lot of drafts, some of them are in 3rd revision already. We got 7 of them, 8 actually, as workgroup documents. Problem statement, architecture, the MPLS encapsulation, use cases, L3 VPN, MVPN, extensions, OSPF extensions, ISIS extensions, and we adopted OAM requirements draft to be worked out in gap analysis. So it was all very lively, no bloodshed. Most noticeably, we are probably the only group without the Yang model. Okay, thanks.
Daniele Ceccarelli for the CCAMP. We had the session at the very beginning of the week. We are one of the working groups that were more heavily impacted by the area reorganization. We were scared. We thought we would have lost interest, but we were positively surprised to see that the room was full. We have 2 new RFCs. They are basically an inheritance from the old management. Then we have 3 drafts in the editor queue, 2 in the ISG processing, and we have 10 working group documents spanning from flexible grid, black links, and we have 3 Yang models, drafts, and 6 individual. So a lot of work to be done in the next future.
So we didn't get an update from forces. Is there anyone here?
The update from forces, you can see the slide, but the main news is there is no forces working group anymore to give you a status. It was one of my dying acts to drag them to the grave with me. They basically pushed out a couple of their last RFCs, and they have 2, they went down with 2 internet drafts still alive. One had just completed working group last call and will pass on to ALIA to be AD sponsored. The other one is pretty well cooked, but the authors wanted to do a little bit more work, and then when they're happy with that, they'll give it to ALIA, and of course there'll be IETF last call on both. The mailing list still exists, so people can talk about the topic, but I expect it will quieten down. The authors say that they have 8 new known drafts coming up, but they haven't even started those, and they're largely documenting what a particular implementation has done so people could interop, and I think that's business as usual for a working group that has gone away.
I2RS.
Okay. I2RS has made some good progress in the last 4 months. By the way, I'm now going to, in my reports, give you shepherds who have kindly reviewed documents in Shepherd, as I want to acknowledge Bach and Quinn Liu for their shepherding. Please volunteer to be a shepherd. We have the architecture and problem statement at the ISG. We have 4 working group drafts, 2 were added during this period. We have 2 adoptions in progress, one for the generic topology model, which is really exciting, and we were pleased to hear that the TEAS group, who will be at the end of the list, thought we did good work, or at least Alexander did good work. There's a draft Wang R2S Yang model. Go ahead. There's a whole bunch of drafts that are coming up that we had a design team work on. There's a topology draft, set of drafts that based on the generic model from layer 1, layer 2, and service topology, which I obviously left. No, it's on the bottom there. We will be having 2 new design teams. We are looking for people who are looking to help us with the final protocol requirement push. If you're interested, please see me. It'll be about 2+ conference calls a week for 2 weeks. Very small requirement. And we will be starting filter-based RIBs. There is an info model and an initial FS security. I am again looking for design team members. Please volunteer. We will do interims. I2RS had the honor of probably doing the most amount of interims for the routing. I don't think many other people did every other week interims. We will continue this jolly approach because we'd like to get the work done quickly. And so those are our interim schedules and our topics. If you'd like to volunteer to be on an interim, it's a virtual interim. All of these are virtual. It's an hour, maybe an hour and a half phone call,
and we present one or two topics and then allow discussions. Our interims are 10 to 11:30 on Thursday. I think, yep, then that's our agenda. IDR. East Coast. My apology. 10 to 11:30 East Coast time zone Thursdays. That is 7 a.m. to 8:30 West Coast time zone, which seems to be the earliest we can have people on the West Coast agree. The China folks are agreeing to stay up at night till 10 to 11 at night. So, the answer? Good. Okay. IDR met in a broom closet. We were very friendly. Somehow, all of you should sign more blue sheets if you like less friendly IDRs. We have 3. I think if you skip to the next one, and you got my slides instead of John. No, it looks like you have John's slides instead of mine. Go to the next one. That's all there was. Oh, you got John's slides instead of mine. Okay. See the chair slides for the status. Go back to the previous one. IDR is. No, it's okay. We've done a whole lot of drafts that we're sending forward to the ISG. We've got a whole lot in working group last call. We've got a whole lot that are finished, and we'll probably push a whole lot more through. Next. For IDR, remember, if it's something that does the protocol, you need 2 implementations. If it's an administrative one, please give it to us quickly. We will again hold virtual interims because we'd like to see the Yang models for BGP go forward. The route server information that Jeff pointed to in the BFD, we hope will be discussed. There seems to be a lot of interest in the flow spec in the next hop. And I think that's my end of the scoop.
Hannes Gredler. Yeah, we will meet tomorrow. Once again, we have been scheduled on Friday, which we think is the result for being difficult with the IGP Common Working Group migration attempts. So we don't believe in coincidence.
I deny everything.
No new RFCs, one new document, one new working group item, which is MRT for ISIS. Active documents, some bug correction in the ISIS route preference handling that's been updated, obviously a Yang model. Segment routing, there is, Stefano has initiated an ask for some of the changes, non-compatible changes to the protocols that we are about to do. Please take an effort and comment that on the list, because after that we are getting slowly into freezing mode. We go into early allocation with IANA, and we want, well, to stabilize the thing and ultimately pave the way for RFC. The extended sequence number draft is into last call, so this basically adds cryptographic, so it makes ISIS prone against replay attacks, right? Rest of the agenda items is more or less updated drafts. 3 to mention, especially here, there is the path computation and reservation, the IEEE 802.1 QCA. So this is the RSVP analogy in IEEE land, assuming Trill and some reservation protocol. And 2 new drafts. One is advertising encapsulation capabilities, so basically entropy label support, tunnel termination capabilities, and also something that came along when running ISIS over overlay networks, and if the underlay goes out of service. So this is the ISIS link overload. Thank you.
So L2TPX is one of the new working groups that we inherited from INT. They didn't meet this week, and we didn't get an update from them. Lisp. Lisp was the other new working group, and the last one is going to be Trill, that we're going to talk about later.
Okay, thank you, folks. I'm Joel Halpern. I co-chair this with Luigi. And Luigi did all the hard work of putting together the slides. So we just got 2 slides. This one is where do we stand on the documents? There are a bunch we've handed to the ADs. There are a bunch that are in last call. We're trying to clear the documents that we committed to the IESG would be done before we take on new work. The ones that don't have circles, those are mostly new work people want us to take on. And there's no shortage of that, but first we're going to finish our assigned items. So other page, please. And this is our milestones, and you can see we're behind on some of them, and we're in last call on a bunch of them. And so we're mostly making progress. We're clearing the introduction, the threats, the security analysis, and the impact, so that if you want to understand what it is, there'll be a set of documents that'll tell you, and then we're going to go on to things like the new mapping system and adding real cryptographic confidentiality, and there's all sorts of data center use cases, and we could go on, but you don't care.
We met earlier this week. We have, this is a slide outlining the major points of what we're working on. We have a lot of, it's not on this slide, but we have a lot of OLSR and NHTP companion documents that are currently in the working group. We have 12 active drafts. There was one RFC that was published between last IETF and this, which was an optimization for OLSR. 6 of those 12 active drafts are submitted to the ISGA for publication, so we're hoping that they get through. Of the 6 that are left, 3 are related to extensions of OLSR and NHTP relating to security and other metrics and various extensions. Of the 3 that are left over, one is a report MIB that we would like to get through last call by the next IETF. And then we have the major points up here being DLAP. At this meeting, we decided we're going to last call it. So that will happen after this meeting. AODVV2 was, we were given a presentation on the state. We asked the room if we should last call it. In Honolulu, we decided that this was the last chance to get the document ready. And the room decided it wasn't ready, but the amount of effort that went into updating the document, the group agreed to give them one last chance. And with that in mind, we're going to have interim meetings, so it's ready by the next IETF meeting to last call, and if it's not at that point, we'll change it to experimental. And there was also a really good discussion on rechartering the working group, as most of our milestones are being closed one way or the other. So if you're interested in doing Man-A related work, we're interested in hearing your ideas. On the slide I listed 3 that came up a lot in the discussions we had: multicast work, extensions for our current drafts, and then a whole bunch of other things, and we will sort through that.
That was Justin, by the way. Thank you.
Hello. So MPLS has...
Hi, Ross.
Hi, this is Ross, by the way. I'm in the back of the room here for those who are in the front and don't see back this far. Our charter was updated as part of the routing area reorganization. So that means some of our work has moved to T's. You can see the charter for MPLS, which is, the URLs there, and I'm sure anybody in the room can find the one for T's as well. We have 7 new RFCs. We've 5 in the RFC editor queue. If I look at my watch, I find it's more than an hour since one of those 5 went to Auth 48, only by about a minute. And there's 5 more that are either with their area director, which has, of course, changed to Deborah. Thank you, Deborah. And or with the ISG. We met Tuesday afternoon. We had 10 presentations, 1 on working group status, plus 9 other ones. We had a fairly lengthy discussion relating to rings and how to make rings require somewhat less configuration to make them come up and so on. We're going to meet again tomorrow afternoon. We, at the time the slide was put together, had 12 presentations for tomorrow. We now have 11, so that's almost progress on its own. We have quite a bit of progress going on, lots more work to be done. There will be discussion of Yang models tomorrow afternoon and a bunch of other things. I am very pleased nobody has complained about being Friday afternoon because, after all, the IETF does meet Friday afternoon. Thank you.
So I'm Benson Schlieser, status on NVO3. So we have had this year 3 virtual interim meetings. They have been focused on particular topics that the working group needs to address and seems to be working pretty well, so we're probably going to keep doing that. We had 2 in-person meetings this week, 2 smaller meetings as opposed to 1 big one, and I noticed that we had less conflict against our list of conflict avoid please, 1, 2, 3 status. We basically had no problems. I was not sure I should actually tell you this, but it turns out that that's because everybody here asks for 2.5-hour sessions, and I'm mostly trying to avoid everybody here. So I don't know if that helps or hurts. Probably hurts me to tell you that, but.
One thing we did find useful, not this time but last time, was having people ask for multiple sessions. Sometimes they ended up getting scheduled together anyway in a 2.5-hour block, but not requiring that it be a 2.5-hour block gives a lot more flexibility. You got to understand scheduling. This is an NP hard problem where we only have one optimized processor, and her name's Stephanie.
Yeah. So I thought I'd mention it in case it helps us all out. No new publications of RFCs since the last status I gave. We have decided to delay the publication of requirements drafts. The intent there is that we will actually merge them with solution documents so that we have fewer documents that are more complete. We're going to have to manage that on a case-by-case basis, of course, but that's the intent. We have milestones due next month, or in a week, or however you want to look at that. And for the architecture and use cases, we're going to try to drive those to completion, hopefully around the right time. And we are currently in a call for adoption of 3 different data plane drafts. So far, it's been fairly positive for all of them, so we'll see how that goes. And an active discussion, really the thing we're focusing on now and next, hopefully, is control plane and some OAM extensions.
Casey Lindum, we have 2, well, almost 1.5 new RFCs. One's sitting in 48, but we went through another working group and IETF last call. You can look at our list archives for more information on that. One positive thing, the OSPF v2 prefix linked attributes, there's a number of implementations of that draft for the segment routing extensions, and this is kind of a common building block that a lot of the other drafts of advertising more information and doing different applications with OSPF are dependent on. So we'd like to working group last call this. I probably, if you want to do the help with the implementation report, or you actually gather that information and write that, I would, and offer an RFC. I'd look for a volunteer to do that. Also another one, this isn't going to need an implementation report, the RFC 4970 BIS. This is another building block for advertising router informational capabilities and extend it beyond one instance so that we can, a lot of other drafts. We'd like to work in group last call this one as well. I think our Yang model is moving along well. I talked to members of the Open Config. There's one thing they want us to look at. That's a change to the ordering of the operational config state. If you saw Rob Shaker's presentation in the NetMod working group, more in line with that, and we're going to look at that. The OSPF v3 extended LSAs, this has got a lot of good review, but we need some implementations. This is another building block for OSPF v3. You could, once you get this, you can extend OSPF v3 ad nauseum. There's a number of drafts we're looking at working group acceptance on, flow spec, entropy label. We'll probably do a call for adoption to that, since that one has been, the companion document has been adopted by MPLS. So I think we're going to call an adoption for that. And the dual stack TE, I think we're going to call adoption for that. That's useful. We also have a goal of getting to OSPF v2 segment routing working group last call before Yokohama. I don't know if we'll get there, if we figure we have enough, but we have implementations, and hopefully it'll be stable enough and we can go forward and get that done too, because there's going to be people shipping it on their routers and other networking devices in the near future. And that's about it. I mean, there's a lot of things that were presented that we want to discuss. Did I spell prog wrong? Okay, good.
I'm Stuart, one of the PALS co-chairs. First off, I'd like to extend a big thanks to Adrian for the excellence of his reviews over the last 6 years. He's always taken an interest in the work of this group and its predecessors. We met on Monday, 9 to 10:30, and the minutes were posted online. Actually, I'm wrong there. They were posted online, I understand, at 10:31. So thanks to Dave Sindicrope for the promptness of publishing them. Since Deborah mentioned, or Leah mentioned the 2.5-hour slot flexibility, we were somewhat surprised when at 10:30 a group came in requiring the meeting to be emptied for a private meeting. We were co-slotted with Forces, and since Forces were cancelled, we naturally assumed after all these years that we could extend over a bit if we needed to. So if this happens again, please could the Secretariat be asked to inform the chairs in advance?
Absolutely, that's news to me as well.
So we have 2 new RFCs. One of them is interesting. 7436 has been published as historic after 12 years of gestation in L2 VPN and PALS. I said 12 because that's the length of time as an IETF document. It may well be longer than that if you take its earlier history. We have 1 draft in IETF review. 5 drafts are in or have completed working group last call, so we've got a nice reading list set up for Deborah. We're getting close to finishing RFC 4447 BIS. This is the signaling protocol used in the combination of pseudo-wire over MPLS with an LDP signaling plane. This is a really important RFC in the pseudo-wire world, and so we would encourage people to review it, to check for any disagreement with the implementations that are out there, and to make sure that we've picked up all of the errata and updates that are in existence. So we would hope that people would help us by reading 4447 BIS, which we hope to take to proposed standard, I think is the next one. Right, thank you.
Julien Maric. Pass completion element working group met yesterday afternoon. We had a significant amount of people in the room on interesting discussion during the face-to-face meeting. We've three new RFCs published in the previous IETF meeting, one of them being the main PC protocol MIB, finally. So thanks for contributors and editors again. We have a handful of documents which passed last call that we need to check about IPR on Shepherd to the SDG. So to make sure that he won't get bored, we're considering as appointing Adrian as one of the shepherds for one of them, maybe. We have some other ones which may be stable enough to be last call within the coming weeks on clearly, hopefully before next IETF. Some another one may be in the pipe also. We started a discussion about our latest milestone of the current charter, which is the new scope, possible scope for a PC working group. We came to a partial conclusion that we clearly need to dedicate some time to gather people from various working groups, including C-Camp, TEAS, maybe 6-ish, maybe even more, at least to start to discuss the possible 6-ish needs, and maybe we use that idea for other candidate topics for PC. Thanks.
Can I clarify one point on that last slide? Even though that last slide in the presentation said 6-ish, it was really more of a DetNet talk. So it's really DetNet that's more applicable. Sorry, Lou Berger.
Pim? So Pim did meet this week. I don't know where Stig or maybe he fell asleep, or Mike are. So we're about to publish 4601 BIS. This is the PIM sparse mode revision. There is, and there was, or I guess there is still, a discuss from the ISG that we need to clear up. We are in the process of getting rechartered, and so there was a good discussion at the meeting this week as well. There is, of course, some Yang work going on, and the chairs are forming a design team. Please talk to the chairs if you want to be part of that. Roll didn't meet this week. Ines didn't fly, and I think Michael had a conflict. Unless that's him. No, that's not him. He had a conflict. What? He's at the airport? Okay. So there is some work that you can read in here about last calls and things that have been submitted already to the ASG or in working with last call. One of the important items that the group is working right now is on rechartering. So there is current discussion with 6LO on NextHop Client++. This is really a shorthand for how to do the compression of headers in the context of the NextHop client. Any other things, please toss to the chairs as well.
Jeff Mansur. We've got new co-chair, Chris. Welcome, Chris. Progress, remote LFA-FRR is in out 48. MFRR has been published or sent to SG. Last call working group complete on operational management for LFAs. Very busy meetings, 2 meetings, 14 items in total, 3 FRR related, through IGP enhancement and 8 young data model drops.
SFC.
Just not here. SFC met today. Problem statement is in the RFC editor queue for publication. Architecture draft is in my queue for review. And they've adopted finally a encapsulation, the age encapsulation, which is really excellent, doing some work on use cases, and there's some discussion about what might make sense to do for control plane, which is, not in charter right now, but obviously there's some interest and expected some discussions going on around that. They already met this morning. Cider?
Sandy Murphy, Parsons. We met very first thing Monday morning. That seems to be kind of a trend. We either meet first thing Monday morning or last thing on Friday. Since the last IETF, we've had 2 drafts that have gone through working group last call. One just ended just before the meeting. Publication was requested for 1 draft, but AD comments need to be addressed. That draft is the AS migration draft, and it's kind of like tangled up with the IDR AS migration draft. So it may not get, it may depend on the progress of the IDR draft. There's 1 draft that was in the RFC editor queue at the last IETF and is still in the RFC editor queue. The problem there is that it got tangled up in the new definition of the IETF trust about using templates, because this draft is supposed to be a template, and so how can people modify it? And if we're, we seem to be talking about process things, it was a little amusing that Trust had an electronic meeting and agreed that this change could go forward, but by the rules they had to meet in person, so it had to wait until their meeting here. So all's clear now, and that one should be progressing to publication real soon now. So since the last meeting, we adopted some new work in defining a new transport protocol for RPKI stuff. Right now it's all defined to work over rsync. People had some concerns about the performance aspects of rsync on the servers, so there's a new transport protocol being defined. I can't read the next line. Oh yeah, publication will be requested imminently for 1 draft. There was a little bit of a hiccup because it had an inadvertent movement of an RFC from informative to normative, which created a downref, which I only discovered because I was doing the anal thing of clicking on each one of the RFCs in the reference. The IDNets reported no downrefs. Turns out that was a bug, and Heinrich has fixed it, and everything's fine now, but if you did a Shepherd write-up recently, you may want to go look at it again. So at the meeting this week, 2 long dormant drafts were revised and presented, and we had some interesting discussions of that. The working group last call for the BGPsec protocol were covered, and a new version for that should be coming out. There was some discussion of doing a BIS on the docket on an RFC that had some errata that were rejected for being technical. And had a presentation by Matthias Wallish about a survey that he did, announced on the CIDR list and NANOG list, about deployment of RPKI and DNSSEC, why they did it and why they did not do it, and that was a very interesting presentation. 15% of the people in each case reported that they simply were not aware that those things existed. Seriously? These are network operators. Oh well. And about 10% of the people said that they thought it was an evil plot on the part of authorities to give a handle on controlling people's operations. Another interesting comment. So that's it.
John Scudder. I guess the first thing is to say thank you to Alvaro for being spring co-chair, and thank you to Bruno for agreeing to step in, and I can say that Bruno has been productive from his first minutes on the job. So we're meeting in the next slot. Please come and sign our blue sheet so we continue to get a big room, and also volunteer to take notes. So we're having a short meeting. It's a 1-hour meeting, which is actually a really useful exercise for helping you focus on which of your work is important and which work is better carried on the mailing list or not at all. So I recommend that to everyone as an occasional interesting discipline. So progress, our problem statement draft is through working group last call. Some Shepard's comments need to be folded into it before it's ready to send to the IESG. That certainly, knock wood, should happen before, well before Prague. We have our main architecture document adopted. Hoping to working group last call that soon. And we have related work in probably more than half the other groups in the routing area, so this is turning into a lot of coordination. And did I have the second slide? I don't think so. I think that's it. Yep, that's all. Thank you.
Paul and Dina.
This is one of the new working groups that was formed as part of the routing area tuning. We met for the first time this morning. There are already 3 documents in RFC editor queue. That's not because we are too efficient, but we inherited a few mature documents from MPLS and CCAMP. In today's session, we had a fair bit of young discussion. All of them are T-related drafts. Some of them have shown a fair bit of promise. We also had a discussion on ACTN. There was some agreement on producing a requirements document to be discussed in Ts, and towards the end of the session there were also some discussion on a few other topics, including a couple of BCP drafts.
Trill is newly entered into the routing area from the internet area. We thank Ted Lemon, who took care of us in the internet area. We're glad to be joyfully in the routing area. Since it's our first time, we will just provide you with the major efforts and priorities. If you had John Hudson's slides, they would be very colorful. So the co-chairs currently believe that our priority is the OEMs and Yang models, help Trill be managed, active. We have a base set of cluster documents. Oh, I should say one other thing. Donald Eastlake is our secretary, and Donald's phenomenal. We have an active base cluster of documents now in the ISG. We'll have a few more that will go through. We're then working on directory assistance and ARP and ND optimization for the Trill campuses and interconnections, and then we will work on multi-level Trill and multi-topology Trill. We're beginning to review drafts. If you have interest, please come and join us, and we have a good set of contributors there. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go into open discussion, we have something else. We have a report from the Routing Directorate. Are you going to do this?
No,
John?
Yeah, stop taking this from your side. So first, I would like you all to know, those of you who are not on the Routing Directorate chairs and haven't interacted with him as much, this is John Hardwick, and in London about a year ago, I convinced him, asked him to serve as one of the routing directorate coordinators, which is to say, Adrian and I tossed drafts and said, could you get someone to review this? At him and Deborah. Of course, now that Deborah is a routing AD, we are delighted that John is willing to not stay on and continue to work, but we also have John Hudson, if he's around. He's somewhere else. So John Hudson has agreed to, and been working, helping John Hardwick and being our two routing directorate coordinators, and that also includes kindly taking minutes during this meeting. So if you wanted to talk about the routing directorate briefly, here's the slides.
Sure, okay. So just since I took over doing this like nearly a year ago, we've been tracking some stats on the workload, sort of the drafts that have been coming through the directorate to get a feel for how much of the total routing area output is really being funneled through the directorate and being reviewed. So I guess the first slide is on just like how the directorate is doing it, being responsive and processing the review requests. I guess I've sent out something like 55 total review requests in like the last 10 months. Of which the vast majority got turned around very promptly. 41 out of 55 were done. I got 11 no responses. 3 people turned around and said they couldn't do it, which is fine and normal. It's generally a lot better to turn around and say, no, I cannot do this promptly than not respond, but that's fine. Next slide. And of those 41 reviews, those 41 documents that got reviewed, here's how we break down in terms of what happens to those documents after the review. So a few of them were just fine. There were no comments. It was just ready to be published as far as the directorate was concerned. Probably the most of them came through with nits, so just basic comments on grammar or terminology or a few minor quibbles. Probably just as many had not major issues, but substantial things to discuss and probably needed a new revision of the document before they went forward. And then a very small number were just not ready and had to go back for major discussion within the working group. So I think this shows that the director does add value to the documents, even if it's just to sort of sanity check that they're okay. And they are doing a pretty good job at catching issues and catching documents that are controversial or just doing the wrong thing. I guess I would encourage chairs to make more use of the directorate. The directorate has about 30-40 people in it. If we're reviewing like 60 documents a year, then I think we have capacity for more. So yeah, please send me your requests. So, thanks.
Yeah, one piece I'd like to just add briefly. I mean, first of all, a lot of you in this room are part of the routing directorate and a lot more elsewhere as well, and I really, really appreciate it. It makes a big difference. Second, we're doing 2 types of reviews. One is what we've talked about as sort of the document QA, which is when a working, exactly when and how to do that was being a little iffy initially, but what we've settled on is after a draft has been adopted as a working group draft, if you think it would benefit from a little bit of cross-working group review, ask for a routing directorate review for document QA, and then finally, when it's out of working group last call, then the ADs, or if the chair, again, if they think it's a good idea, can ask for a routing director review. So we have 2 stages, one very early where there's a chance of actually impacting the having a more substantial impact in the technology without causing people to pull out their hair, and one later on helping clarify and refine the quality of the document.
Having got used over the years to us not really reviewing documents well enough before they get to you 3 folks at the front, I wonder whether, as documents get close to the point where you want a directorate review, in addition to pointing the finger at someone, it should go to the directorate list with a request for a volunteer. Because people might be more inclined to do extra gratuitous reviews if they knew that it was needed.
We could I think that we have few enough reviews that we could certainly think about CCing the directorate so that they know which drafts have publication requests on them, or we have a request for a directorate review on.
I think it's a good idea to CC the directorate list when we send out a review request so that people know what's coming in.
I apologize for not mentioning this to Stuart 5 minutes ago when he asked me the same thing, but it just occurred to me that that's actually what was done in the deep distance past before Adrian and I revamped the routing area directorate. And what we found is pretty much the same 3 or 4 people were the ones who always responded. Thank you, Aaliyah. You were one of the 3 or 4, and I think Adrian was too until he became area director. So with 2 of the 4 becoming ADs, that didn't work either. But I think that's why we went, I think by the assigning specific people and expecting people to actually do their reviews, we got a wider number of people at least who responded. I realized we could do a bit of both.
Yeah, I was assuming we would do a bit of the directed, because you know about the technology, please could you help us out review, and a bit of the Gen Art style review where a competent person gets to randomly review things they might not have otherwise looked at.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do is do targeted reviews, but CC the review request to the routing directorate. So if you see a draft that you would like, then you know it's available to review. Of course, they're always available to review, but those, at that point, your reviews would be very helpful. AC?
AC Lindum, I found that recently, I've been on the directorate for a number of years, and I found that recently the drafts that I've been asked to review are a lot more relevant to my experience and what I'm working on in my day job than they were when we first started. I'd just get something random. And I think it works better. It's worked a lot better. Also, I'm wondering, did I have 2 of the 3 out of the 3 this year that were not ready? I think I did.
You had at least 2 to review. I don't know. I can't remember if they were both not ready.
Yeah. So, AC, one of the answers there is having each person in the directorate fill out the wiki indicating what their experience is and what they feel comfortable reviewing really helps, because it's even better than my memory.
So we're now on to open discussion. But before anyone gets up, we do have sort of an ask of things that we want to hear from you. Actually, if any of you was last night had the pleasure of being last night at the administrative plenary, how many? Okay. Then you heard that Michael, as NOMCOM chair, mentioned the fact that sometimes the NOMCOM acts as performance review, but this is 18 months after an AD, for example, has been seated, because there is no way to get feedback or no real way to do formal feedback into ADs. So one of the things we want to ask, if you want to talk about here today, that's fine. If you want to find us, that's okay as well. Please give us feedback. The more you give us, the better, about how we are doing, how can we make things better individually, or how is the area working? What are things that are going well, or things that could be improved? This is awfully important so that we keep the area working well, and personally so that we can actually improve if there's something that we need to improve, and not wait till 2 years later when we're kicked out because we didn't do the job. So it's better to do the job all along than to wait till the end. So with that in mind, if any of you want to get up and say anything around this, please. If you want to talk about any other thing related to the routing area, of course, you can, of course, go ahead. We only have 2 microphones? Okay, there we go.
Sorry, microphone again. So, this is not about the routing area, but it's about an IESG job, which is organizing the administrative plenary. So I survived about 2/3 of it yesterday, including a very long travelogue about Prague. Any chance that we could sort of slim this thing down? Because by the time I left, about half the people who started off had already left. So how about a short, targeted admin plenary like we were originally promised, which seems to have somewhat grown in recent times?
We can pass the feedback on and be fetchy for you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We really do look for feedback and trying to figure out how to do this well and make the IETF, make the routing area energetic and get things done quickly and well. So, please provide feedback and ask questions, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for staying this long.
If someone hasn't signed the blue sheets, please come to the front. They're up here.
Are you having fun now?
Yes, I'm standing by the
Oh.
Why is this thing automatically done? Why do you think it's
Sorry? Why?
Why do you think